In today's American English pronunciation lesson, we're talking about sound clusters and one of the biggest mistakes that you want to avoid. Hi, I'm Josh, your American English guide, and this is English Hacks Pronunciation, where I help you to sound more like a native if you want, and to understand real, natural American speech better. The first thing we have to talk about is what is a sound cluster and what is not a sound cluster. And this is very important because a lot of online resources will confuse you, okay? Don't be confused by this. Remember, there's a difference between the spelling, meaning the written letters, and the sounds. Many resources will tell you that English has 5 vowels: A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y. Let's just throw that out. We don't need that in here. But the reality is that those are just the written letters that represent vowel sounds. There are actually 10 or more vowel sounds in English depending on the dialect. Now, why is this important for consonant clusters? Because not all letter combinations in the spelling are actual sound clusters. For example, the letter S and the letter H combine in spelling to form the SH sound, sh. But this is not the S sound plus the H sound, nor is it a blending of these two sounds. This spelling simply refers to the sound sh. So what is an actual consonant cluster? Well, a consonant cluster is when we take 2 or sometimes 3 consonant sounds, not letters, and we put them together. For example, the P sound and the L sound. Pull, pull. Note that this is not P plus ul, so there shouldn't be any extra sound. Not pull, just pull, pull. Although we do sometimes add a little extra sound between them when we're exaggerating.
Hilarious.
So instead of having an extra sound between them normally, they should more or less overlap, and you should say them either at exactly the same time or almost the same time. And be careful, sometimes things are extra tricky. For example, the word 12 uses the cluster of t and w, tw. However, the word two, which is spelled with a T and a W, does not use this cluster. It's just t plus the vowel oo, two. As I've said many times before, focus on the sound, not the spelling. This lesson will cover many consonant clusters, but not all of them. Just remember that you can always use the same technique. You want to make sure you can do the first sound, you want to make sure you can do the second sound, and then you want to focus on your transition between the two sounds. And if you use that basic technique, you can learn how to pronounce any cluster that you find. Let's start with some clusters that use the L sound. Now remember, we're going to be talking only about the full L consonant, what is commonly called the light L, because the dark L, what I call the half L vowel sound, is a vowel sound, so it doesn't apply as a consonant cluster. First, let's look at BL and PL. So the way that you're going to do this, remember that the P and the B are both in the same position with your lips closed. And you actually have 2 options. You can either have your lips closed, bring your tongue up into that L position while your lips are still closed, and then when you release that P or B, the L is already there. Or you can release the P and B and then immediately bring the tongue up without any extra sound between them, which is a little harder to do, but it is still part of how we speak. We'll do somewhere between those 2 versions. So to keep things simple, I recommend that you just try to say them at the same time. Bring that tongue up while your lips are closed. Blue, black, play, please. Now let's look at some examples for k plus ul and g plus ul. So again, the k and g will also share the same position using the back of the tongue. And just like with the p or the b, you have two options, okay? So you can already be in that k or g position and bring the front of the tongue up at the same time, so you're actually touching in both places, like kl, gl. Or you can have this closed, and then as soon as you release this, you need to immediately and quickly bring that tongue up so that there's no extra sound between them. Kl, gl, okay? Not kull, gull, kl, gl. For example, clear, claw, glee, ugly. Now let's look at the combination of F and L. And the way you're going to do this, it's very similar to the P or B, except of course we're not closing the lips, we're using the lip here to touch the teeth. And then while you're doing that, you can either already have the L there, fl, 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 say them at the same time, or you can immediately bring it up when you release the F, fl, 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 but not full, full. We don't want that extra sound between. Flow, fly, flee. Now let's move on to some examples for the R combinations. Now remember, we also have two versions of the R, and I'm not talking about the R-colored vowels. That's its own little separate group. We have the consonant sound and the vowel sound. And remember, the basic difference between them is that the vowel is just a little bit longer relative to the consonant. So the difference between the consonant and the vowel here is important. We're not worried about the vowel. We're just focused on the consonant R combinations. So first let's look at B plus and P plus Just like with the L combinations, you can either be doing the R at the same time, or you can start the R as soon as you release the first sound. Again, I do recommend that you try to just do them at the same time because it's easier and you're less likely to have the vowel sound, because remember, it's a little longer. We don't want that extra sound between, so it'll just be a nice clean consonant sound. Break, brown, breathe, practice, price, approve. Now let's look at the K and G combinations with R. Of course, we're closing back here for the K and the G, but you can sort of already have your tongue there. Cur, cur. Because of how the tongue is shaped with this, normally we release the K or G kind of like this. It kind of depends on the sound that's after it, really. Like if you go into E, key, you might kind of actually push forward a little as you release. For the in order to kind of get a little bit more space in there and get the tongue just a little bit more into the right position or shape, it's very common that we'll actually kind of, instead of just doing this, we'll kind of pull back a little bit so that the tongue can adjust a little. Cur, 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 or grr, grr, grr. It's not required to do that, but if you're having difficulty with just having that R already there and releasing, then that can give you a little bit of extra help. Crack, cry, sacred, green, great, grow. Now some T and D examples, and as I've talked about before on this channel, there are two ways to do the T plus R consonant and D plus R consonant. Some speakers will use a T and a D plus the R. They'll say ter or der. But many speakers will either also or instead use chur and jur. They'll change the T into a CH and a D into a J, like a J sound, because it allows us to sort of slide better into that and this is what I recommend you do. But again, you could do it either way. I'm going to do the chur and jur way because that's how I speak and that's what I recommend. But I will tell you how to do both. If you do the clean t or d, you want to go tur, tur, tur. So you have a nice clear release, and then immediately that R starts to form. So you can't quite already be in that. You can have a little bit of the shape starting to form and then release here and finish pulling into it, just because of how the tongue is to make the T sound. And same thing with the D, it's just voiced. So we're up here. Again, don't touch the teeth for T and D in English. So you just want to release and then finish that R position immediately after. Not tur or dur. No, tur, dur, like train or drain. Now if you do this, the CH, ch, or the J, j way that I do, then instead of having a nice clean release, you're going to just sort of blend, right? Because the CH is t plus sh, the SH sound. And so you're going to do that sound instead. Ch, 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 ch. So it's not a clean t, right? And then that allows you to already be pulling back a little more easily into the R instead of needing to do a clear release. So chur, train, or jur, drain, train, trip, attribute, drain, drip, drown. And the last combination for the R consonant that we will talk about is with F and R. Now for this, just like with the F and L, we bring the bottom lip up to the top teeth here. Again, make sure your mouth is open enough so you don't say like f, 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 or something like that. But again, because we're using the lips, the tongue is independent. You can already be in that R. Fur, fur, fur. The only thing is that first, because F is voiceless, even if you're in that R position, you want to let the breath go without voice. And then you can just add the voice and the tongue is already there. Fur, fur, fur. Okay? Or you can, as soon as you release the F, you can then pull into the R really quick immediately. And that will also work. Just make sure there's no extra sound between it or it's not too long to be the vowel. From, fresh, free. Now we're going to look at a group that is a little tiny bit different because of the physical mechanics of the mouth, and that is with the S sound. First, let's talk about SL. So we're going to start in the S position, which I have a lesson on that. I'm not going to talk about all the details of how to do that here, but we're somewhere up and around here. So we get that nice clear whistle sound. Okay, and the L is going to be in front of that. Okay, and we're doing that full L consonant again. We're not doing the half L, although that is possible. We're not going to worry about that here. So we're going to do, for example, sleep, right? So we're going to go sl. And the tongue will kind of, it's not that you're pushing it forward, it's kind of like the tongue is here. And the front will kind of maybe extend out and flatten a bit like that. Now remember, with the L, you can touch the teeth. You can put it flat on the teeth, that's fine, or you can just be sort of up here. I also have lessons about the L sound for how to form that. So the transition between these two might be the most difficult point. Now, because of the physical mechanics of the S, you can't actually do the S and the sound after it at the same time, but we want to transition really quickly. So it's not like slow. Okay, you don't want to drop down into like that and then do an L. You need to immediately reach out into that L position. Alternatively, instead of trying to push the front of the tongue out like this, you can kind of just, if it's here, you can kind of just push it up a bit, make sure it's flat enough. Sl, instead of sul. The exact L will sound slightly different. It doesn't matter. We don't identify it as a different sound. Sleep, slow, slap. Now let's look at some examples for SM and SN. So first SM. Now this one, we can't quite completely overlap it because if we close the lips, there's no S coming out, but we immediately want to just transition to that M. So that S will probably go all the way to the M. Okay, it doesn't have to go 100%, but you generally want to hold it all the way until the lips close. Smart, smoke, smell. For SN, same thing, except this one, just like with the SL where we were maybe extending out or kind of just closing up, you want to just close up here because the N is going to be right here around that bump. Again, not touching the teeth for the N. So sn, sn, sn. That's all you really do. You just close your tongue up from the position it's at. Sn, sn, sn. Okay, and then you go into the rest of the word. Snow, snail, snake. Now for the SW, S and W. This one you can overlap because the tongue and the lips are independent, but sort of like we saw with previous ones, you can either overlap them or you can immediately start the W right after. So if you do them at the same time, it would be and then you just release the W and the S at the same time, like sweet. Okay? Or you can do sweet. So by the time we get into that W, halfway through, that S is already starting to fade, the voice is coming in, and then we're in that woo position. Okay? So 2 ways, there's no right or wrong, it's kind of whatever comes out. I'm going to go ahead and overlap them to make them nice and simple and clear. Sweet, swept, password. Now let's look at a special group with the S. We have 3 combinations here, the SP, ST, and SK. Now we're not going to worry about the D, G, and B because those are voiced and they won't really go with the S. That would be maybe a Z with those. What happens here is a little bit special, and I've talked about this in the lessons, main lessons for the P, T, and K. But the S will have an effect on these voiceless stop consonants, T, P, and K, if there's something after them. If they're at the end of the word, you're just going to hear like sk, like ask, ask. Or with like last, we'll commonly just drop that T at the end, right? But if you do push it out, it is a T. However, if there's something after it, like say this ST or SP or SK is at the start of the word or in the middle of the word, then, or if there's some sort of linking between words, then what's going to happen is the S is going to have a weird effect on these sounds. It's going to dull them or make them sort of weaker. So they are going to be the weak versions, and the weak versions of these voiceless stop consonants sound very similar to the weak versions of the voiced stop consonants. So a S plus T will make the T sound kind of like a weak D sound. And if you don't know what I mean by strong and weak or aspirated and unaspirated, I have lessons about that. You can look up the main lessons for the stop sounds. But basically, for example, if I say spot, okay, it is still a P sound. It doesn't change into a B, but it sounds very similar to a B. And the way that I used to teach this is that it's still a P, that period, right? But because it's so similar to a weak B, it doesn't really matter that much, and you can just go ahead and kind of make it into more of a B sound. That's fine. But make sure it's weak, okay? We don't want to say spot, no, okay? So spot, spot, pa, 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 pa. Like happy, happy, it sounds kind of like a weak B, but it's a P. Spot. Okay, so let's take a look first at the SP combinations. Spot, spit, lisp. Remember that last one is an actual normal weak P unless we stop it, lisp. Okay, if you push it out, there's nothing after it. So as long as it doesn't link to the next word, it will just be a weak P, not a weak B, and actually sound more like a P than a B. Now the ST combinations, so this is going to make the T sound kind of like a weak D. Start, stop, last. Again, at the end there, if there's no connection, it's just a weak T, or you can either maybe drop it in this case, or just sort of do a held stop, last. But if I say, for example, the last is, The last is. The last is. Okay, now it's going to turn back into that thing that sounds sort of like a weak D, but it's still technically a T. And lastly, the SK combination. Scared, scum, ask. And again, that last example is going to be more of an actual K. If I say ask it, ask it, ask it. Starting to sound a little bit more like a weak G, but it is still technically a K. Now, the last examples that we're going to talk about, we have three special groups here, and these are going to be a little bit different. So we're going to first look at the FT, PT, and KT combinations. And again, this does depend if there's something after it or not. So for example, if I say packed, it goes from K to T, packed. Okay, it's just a K and a T. But if I say packed it, packed it, packed it, it's gonna kind of turn into more of that D-type sound because it's linking, just like we saw with the S. So the F, the P, and the K before a T sound, if there's something after that T inside of a word or at the start of the next word that it can link to, like a vowel, it will also soften that T just like the S does. For each of these, we'll have two examples that are just like the F to the regular T at the end, and then the last example will be one where it changes into that sort of weak D sounding type of T. Now the way that you do the FT combination, again, lip and tongue are independent, so we'll bring that F up. Because the T is a stop sound, you can't like do them at exactly the same time because the T needs to close and be pushed out. But you're going to hold that F until the tongue closes in the middle. And then you just push it out. Laughed. Coughed. After. Now for the PT, like we saw with the FT, we're using the lips again, but the P is another stop sound. So if I say kept, we push out a little P, weak P. Okay, it has to be a weak P. And then we push out a weak T. Now there are ways where you can sort of stop that T, kept. We're not going to worry too much about that. We're just worried about sort of the clearer versions here. So let's take a look at that. Kept. Roped. Mapped it. So again, mapped, just a T, mapped it. It's going to change it kind of more into that semi-weak D type sound, but it's still technically a T. And for the KT combination, so here they are both with the tongue, but K is also a stop sound. So we have K and T. Now you can already have the tongue ready there as you release this, so it's like just like that. As soon as you release this, this comes up and then releases. So if we say packed, okay, packed, packed, locked, actor. Now the very last group we're going to see is a very, very special group. I saved this one for last. This has to do with the three consonant combinations, all starting with S. Now I've mentioned before on this channel that we have sort of a general rule of sorts that English does not like three consonant sounds together in general, okay? And so for example, if we say bankruptcy, bankruptcy, ptsi. So we have a P sound, a T sound, and an S sound, spelled with a C, but it's an S sound. Ps. English doesn't really like that, especially with those two stops next to each other, followed by another consonant. So what we tend to do is we'll drop that middle, bankruptcy. We'll just go from the P to the S, and the T will disappear. In this special group where we have S plus two consonants, like SPL, for example, we saw PL, this is SPL. We do not drop the middle, so this is an exception to that rule where we might drop that middle consonant in normal speech. Okay, clearly enunciated, bankruptcy, you do PTS, but in everyday speech, if you're not clearly enunciating, then we're going to usually drop that middle one. Here with the S, you don't want to do that. It doesn't matter if you're clearly enunciating or if you're just speaking normally. You want to have all three consonant sounds there. And this is because of, again, how the S works. So when we have like P and U, we can sort of overlap those. Play, play, play. But then we can also put an S in front of it, and the S, just with how the shape of the mouth is and how the sounds can flow together nicely. Sp, spl, spl, spl. So you're really just putting an S before the consonant cluster pull, and it becomes sort of a 3-consonant cluster. But really, I would think of this as S plus the consonant cluster PL, or whatever cluster it is. And it's technically a 3-consonant cluster, but I don't recommend thinking about it that way. But let's just go ahead and look at some examples anyway. And remember that, like we talked about with the SP combination, the ST combination, the SK combination, where that S will kind of weaken the T, P, or K and make it sound a little bit like the weak voiced version, that will still happen here. Okay? So instead of like play, splay, play, splay, split, spleen, splatter, spring, sprain, spree, street, strip, strain, screen, script, scratch, squad, squeak, squander. Thank you so much for watching another English Hacks lesson. I'll see you in the next one. We've been over this. I'm trying to record a video, and you are interrupting. See the kid. See the camera, say hi.